Welcome to another episode of Shed Manufacturing. In today's installment, we'll be working on the engine and transmission package for our Project 66 Lincoln. So here we have a straight 6 Mercedes turbo diesel, and right there we have a Ford 6R80 transmission. They were never really meant to go together, but they will. This is a transmission and torque converter adapter from a 6R80, which is that guy, and an OM606, which is this guy. This goes on the torque converter, this goes on the bell housing, and it makes two things that were never meant to happen pretty well. We'll get these two bolted up, see what they look like as far as like an overall package, and see how they're going to fit in the engine bay of this thing. I think it'll sit a little far forward because of the front sump situation meshing with the cross member, but I don't think we'll have any actual like fitment crowding issues. I may cut a lip off the cross member. We'll get to that when we get to it. Let's see about getting these together. This adapter kit is made by Ben's Force, which conveniently comes with a nice spec sheet of all of the bolts, the bolt lengths, the bolt sizes, and the torque specs needed for each one. So installation was pretty plug and play. You just line it up, put the dowels in, torque it to spec. To be getting this package installed, we'll be using this gantry crane that I made a couple weeks ago to reassemble the mill that I bought. It's not very pretty, but it seems to be strong enough to do the job. Unfortunately, I didn't measure a whole lot when I built it, so it's only just tall enough to get the engine in the bay with a little bit of wriggling. Okie dokie. So engine and transmission are together and in. That's pretty groovy. Let me show you real quick where we're at. So this right here, this area, that's the cross member, and right up front we have the drop for the front sump. And right now there's like a 2-inch gap. So what I'd like to do is to get the engine and transmission package slotted as far back into the body as possible. That'll give me the most clearance between the harmonic balancer and the front of the car. So that would make getting my radiator, AC condenser, and intercooler package nice and up front and out of the way and easy to service and all that. And that would mean that I'd be able to keep all of my intercooler piping inside the engine bay instead of having to go out into the fender wells and then back in and then back out through here. That's always an option, but I'd rather not do it. I went ahead and put the manifold and the turbo on just so I could have a quick peek. And I think it looks quite handsome in there. So yeah, what I'm going to do is get an engine support stand, like what you'd have for a front wheel drive car if you're going to do a subframe out job. And I'll support the back of the engine and transmission with it, so that way I can lift the whole car up. Because right now the transmission is sitting on the floor and the engine sitting on the cross member. The cross member won't go nowhere when we lift the car up, but the transmission, if you lift the car up right now, will try and just throw itself onto the ground and wedge the engine in the bay, and I really don't want to do that. So I'll get that supported, we'll get the car lifted up, and we'll see what our undercar clearance looks like and how much of this tunnel is going to have to get cut. Alright, so we got the engine and transmission together. Welcome to the underside. So as you can see, the transmission is now the lowest point of the vehicle, which is unacceptable because it sits about 3 inches below what is supposed to be the lowest point of the vehicle, which is like a frame rail, and to be honest, we can probably chop that off, you know. So what I'll probably do is from this cross member back, I will cut the sheet metal between these two frame rails. I'll cut that all the way to the front, and then I'll cut it nice and high around the top of the transmission tunnel. And then that whole piece should pop out with me. And then I'll be able to raise this up the 3.5 inches, make a transmission mount that will bolt. So this bolts is where the factory mount for the 6R80 goes, and I have that, so I'm going to go ahead and bolt that to here and then make a mount for here that'll attach to that. So then we'll have a transmission that's actually in the car, located with the low point being higher than the actual low point. And from there we can decide how much of this tunnel we're going to cut. Well, I think as far as test fit goes, we're doing pretty good. After I got the tunnel cut, that's that bit. As soon as I got the tunnel cut and was able to pull the transmission up into the cabin, I was able to get the engine nice and leveled out. I went ahead and added a couple of small blocks of wood underneath the engine and on top of the subframe. So we have an area that, like a little service gap between those two, and that helps level out the angle of the rear drive shaft output, because if I set it so that the engine is a little lower, which we have a room to go down with the engine, but I don't think I need to, considering I've got plenty of hood clearance. The transmission has to come up so far to not hit the ground that you wind up having a drive shaft that's pointed upwards, which would be a real pain. So we got that leveled out. I think the engine sitting in nice and handsomely. With it raised up, we can actually slot it back over that little lip on the subframe. See, it's back and nice and close. I'll probably increase that gap before I make the motor mounts final, but I'm pretty happy with where it's sitting in here. Guess next installment is to start making mounts. Okay, so it's about a week later and I've ordered a new transmission mount. So this is the OEM mount and this is the new one that we've got ordered. And as you can see, this one has the mating surface for the bushing much higher up than the OEM, which means that we'll actually have a fighting chance of keeping this above the frame rails. Although this mount is nice and low profile, I do have a couple of little issues with it. So it has a more universal style where you have a bolt holding two polyurethane bushings and then the steel bushing in it to make sure that it doesn't get compressed too much. And this sandwiches the plate like so. But my issue with this system is that this steel inner bushing is designed to keep the two polyurethanes from getting compressed too much, but as a result it has to sit in here, and that's going to transmit some noise and vibration to the cabin, which I don't want. That's sort of the whole point of the mount. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remake this out of Delrin, which is a hard plastic, but it will still have some of the compression advantages to preventing these polyurethane discs from getting compressed too much, but it won't transmit anywhere near as much vibration as steel will. And I'll also tighten up the tolerances so we don't have this just clanking around in there. Let's get to the lathe.
Yes, I do know that this is a lot of stick out for a lathe operation, but that's why I have the live center in there, and also it's Delrin, and so the cutting loads are pretty small. This stock is just a little bit too round to pass through the back, and I couldn't be bothered to part off any. There's already enough bandsaw work in this episode.
Right, so I got a little ahead of myself just sort of making this thing, so I'll give you a quick recap of what we got. So in order to make sure that I got the cross beam or the cross member in nice and straight and make sure that I'd be able to access pulling the transmission out later on down the line, I figured I'd go ahead and make it 3 pieces, but every time I've welded something in 3 pieces or welded something and then tried to weld something again and then again, none of the holes line up and it's always a huge pain. So what I went ahead and did was cut 3/4 of the way through with the bandsaw, and so this back edge on both sides is still connected, but all the way around at the front it's not. And then I welded on these L brackets, and then I drilled those L brackets for through bolts. So when we weld the cross member into the unibody, everything will line up, and then all we have to do is cut our little tacks that we made right at the edge, and cut the back of this with a cut-off wheel on an angle grinder, and we'll be able to have a fully bolt-in cross member where everything points at itself. And I went ahead and bent this guy up and welded him on. So that's the perch for the new adjustable mount that we got. And I think I'm going to set it with the new mount in the all the way low position, so that way we still have room to lift the transmission up for clearance purposes or whatever we need a little further down the line. So what I'm probably going to do next is tidy up the edges here, and then get these guys welded on in, and then we'll make our cuts and have this be a removable piece.
So I didn't actually film it, but I definitely welded that transmission mount in later down the line. So these mount system that I got for the front is from Rough Stuff Specialties, which is more of an off-road and like four-wheeler type website that builds, or that specializes in guys building their own stuff with universal kits. So this is just a universal bushed mount setup. So it comes all laser cut and really accurate, so just got to clean them up, get them ready for cutting, and get them ready for welding.
Ideally, I'd be able to weld my motor mounts with the bushing in place, so that way I can have an accurate idea of where everything needs to go and how much offset I need to place the two arms on the motor mount. Unfortunately, if I did this, everything would melt in the motor mount system because it's polyurethane and they're not meant to be all that hot. So I guess we can just start the side project counter of making new bushings.
So I know I sort of gloss over how I actually got the angles on the mounts to line up so nice. A little bit of it is guesswork, but most of it was I put a angle protractor on it, figured out what my angle was, and then took an offset of where the hole was going to be, and then made a cut with a little bit of leeway, and then tightened it up for the next cut, and they just sort of slotted right on. I was pretty pleased with how quickly and easily they slipped into place for being the right length to go in between the chassis and the engine.
So I threw a lick of paint on it off camera, and that's one motor mount that's totally done. At some point I'll have to pull the engine to fully weld the spud at the bottom for the mount. So now all I've got to do is do the other side. All right, so we were able to get both the motor mounts fully welded, painted, and bolted in. I have the mount bushing holder welded onto the subframe, but we won't be able to fully weld that with the engine still in the car. And in order to pull the engine comfortably with the gantry, I want to get the intake manifold bolted on because it has a cool little mount on it to hoist from. But in order to do that, I have to source a bunch of M7 hardware, which is like trying to find rocking horse shit. So I've got those on order, but we won't be able to get that in for probably another week or so. So as far as this episode is concerned, the mounts are built, the trans mount's built, the trans and the engine are bolted together, and it's all sitting in the engine bay, happy as a clam. I'll take it, and I'll see you on the next one.